A 2-year-old boy scratched a billionaire's fiancée across the face. 3 red lines drawn by tiny fingernails right across her left cheek. In a house where no one had ever raised their voice at this woman, where every staff member looked away when she walked past, a maid who hadn't spoken more than 10 words in 4 months stepped forward and said something that changed everything. What she said made a man in a wheelchair do something no one had ever seen before. If you believe a mother's instinct is the most powerful force on earth, hit subscribe. Tell me in the comments about a time you stood up for someone who couldn't defend themselves. Stay, the ending will hit you hard. Nora Castillo had been working in Julian Mercer's mansion for exactly 4 months. And in those 4 months, not a single person in that house had ever asked her name. Not once. She was the maid. That was it. She cleaned the bathrooms on the 2nd floor. She wiped down the kitchen after dinner. She came in through the service entrance at 7 in the morning and left the same way at 6 in the evening. She never used the front door. She never made eye contact with anyone who wasn't part of the cleaning staff. Julian Mercer was a 33-year-old tech billionaire who had built his company from a dorm room in Seattle. Mercer Technologies was worth $2.3 billion. Julian ran it from the 2nd floor of his mansion because for the past several weeks he had been in a wheelchair. The staff whispered about it. Some said a car accident, some said a spinal issue. Nobody knew for sure because Julian never explained and nobody dared to ask. Then there was Clarissa, Julian's fiancée, tall, sharp, always dressed like she was walking into a board meeting. She moved into the mansion 3 months ago, and from the very first day, Clarissa made one thing clear to everyone on staff. She was in charge, not Julian, not Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, Clarissa. The day everything changed started like any other day. Nora's babysitter called at 6 in the morning and said she couldn't take Ben, her son. 2 years old, big brown eyes, and a habit of putting everything he could reach into his mouth. Nora had no backup, no family in Seattle, so she brought Ben to work, kept him quiet in the staff room near the kitchen, and hoped nobody would notice. By evening, Ben had been in that small room for almost 11 hours. He was restless. He was hungry. And when Nora stepped out to grab clean towels, Ben pushed the door open and wandered into the main hallway. He walked straight toward the living room where Clarissa was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. On the side table next to her sat a crystal vase filled with white flowers. Ben reached for it. His small fingers wrapped around the edge, and then Clarissa grabbed his arm. Not gently. Not the way you guide a child away from something breakable. Clarissa grabbed Ben's arm the way you grab something you want to throw. Her fingers wrapped tight around his tiny wrist, and she yanked him back hard enough that his feet left the ground for half a second. Ben screamed. Not a tantrum scream, a pain scream. The kind that comes from a place a 2-year-old doesn't even have words for. His body twisted, and as Clarissa pulled him closer to shout at him, his free hand swung upward. His fingernails caught her across the left cheek. 3 thin red lines appeared instantly on her skin. Clarissa dropped him. Ben hit the floor on his side and started crying. Clarissa touched her face, looked at the blood on her fingertips, and something in her expression shifted from shock to rage. "Get this child out of my house," she said. Her voice was shaking, but not from pain, from fury. "Right now, get him out." 2 staff members stood frozen near the hallway. Mrs. Patterson appeared from the kitchen doorway, hands clasped in front of her, eyes wide. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Clarissa turned toward the hallway. "Where is his mother? Who brought a child into this house without permission?" Nora was already running. She had heard the scream from the 2nd floor. She came down the stairs so fast she nearly tripped on the last step. She saw Ben on the floor, crying, holding his arm. She saw the red marks on Clarissa's cheek. She saw the entire staff standing still like they had forgotten how to breathe. Nora dropped to her knees and pulled Ben into her arms. She checked his wrist. It was red. You could see the outline of fingers pressed into his skin. Her son had been grabbed hard enough to leave marks. She looked up at Clarissa. I want this woman fired tonight, Clarissa said, turning toward Mrs. Patterson. And I want that child out of this house in the next 10 minutes. This is unacceptable. Mrs. Patterson opened her mouth, but nothing came out. And then Nora stood up, slowly, with Ben pressed against her chest, one hand cradling the back of his head. She looked directly at Clarissa and said 6 words that changed everything in that house. Don't touch my son again. The room went completely silent. Clarissa stared at her like she couldn't process what had just happened. A maid, talking back, in front of everyone. Before Clarissa could respond, a voice came from behind them, calm, low, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to fill a room. The boy stays. Everyone turned. Julian Mercer was sitting in his wheelchair at the far end of the hallway. Nobody had noticed him. Nobody ever noticed when Julian moved through his own house because the wheelchair made almost no sound on the marble floors. He looked at Clarissa, then at Nora, then at the small boy in her arms, still crying softly into her shoulder. The boy stays, he said again. And so does she. Clarissa didn't say another word. She turned and walked out of the room. Her heels clicked against the marble, sharp and fast, the sound of someone trying to hold on to control they had just lost. Nobody followed her. Nobody checked on her. For the first time in 3 months, Clarissa left a room, and not a single person in that house moved to make sure she was okay. Mrs. Patterson looked at Julian, then at Nora, then quietly walked back into the kitchen without saying anything. The 2 staff members near the hallway disappeared. Within 30 seconds, the room was empty, except for Julian in his wheelchair and Nora standing 5 feet away with Ben still pressed against her chest. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Not the way people usually looked at the cleaning staff. Not past her, not through her, at her. "What's your name?" he asked. Nora blinked. 4 months in this house. 4 months of cleaning his bathroom, folding towels he used, wiping counters he ate from, and this was the first time anyone with the last name Mercer had asked her that question. "Nora," she said. "Nora Castillo." Julian nodded slowly. "And the boy?" "Ben, he's 2. Julian looked at Ben, who had stopped crying but was still pressing his face into his mother's neck, his small fingers gripping the collar of her uniform. Julian's expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes shifted. Something Nora couldn't name. "There's a room on the 1st floor near the kitchen," Julian said. "It's not being used. Put a bed in there for your son. If you need to bring him again, that's where he stays." Nora opened her mouth to say something, thank you, probably, but Julian wasn't finished. "And from now on," he said, "if anything happens in this house that involves you or your son, you come to me, not Mrs. Patterson, me, directly." Nora didn't know what to say. She nodded. Julian turned his wheelchair and rolled back down the hallway without another word. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes, but for Nora, it was the first time in 4 months that she felt like a person in that house instead of a function. The next morning, Nora brought Ben again. The room Julian mentioned had already been set up. A small cot, a blanket, a plastic bin with a few toys that looked brand new. She didn't know who arranged it. She didn't ask. Ben settled in quickly. He sat on the floor, chewing on a thick rubber band he had found near the kitchen, twisting it around his fingers, pulling it with his teeth. Nora watched him for a moment and smiled. Her son could turn anything into entertainment. She went upstairs to start her shift, and for the first time in 4 months, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She didn't feel invisible. Someone had seen her. Someone had said her name out loud, and that someone was the last person she had ever expected. But Nora didn't know that someone else in this house had also been watching that night. And that person was already making plans. Clarissa didn't forget what happened that evening. She didn't move on. She didn't let it go. What she did was something far more calculated. She started building a case. It began with small things. The next morning, Nora went to the supply closet to get her usual cleaning products. The bottles were in the same place, same shelf, same position. But when she used them on the bathroom tiles upstairs, something was wrong. The surface smeared instead of cleaning. The glass left streaks no matter how many times she wiped. She tried again. Same result. She checked the label. It looked right, but the liquid inside was different, thinner. It smelled slightly off. Nora didn't understand it. She had been using the same products for 4 months without a single issue. She spent an extra 40 minutes that morning trying to get the bathrooms to look the way they always did. By the time she finished, she was behind schedule on everything else. That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson called her into the kitchen. Her face was tight. Her hands were folded on the table the way they always were when she was about to deliver bad news. "Nora, there's been a complaint. The second-floor bathroom wasn't properly cleaned this morning." "I cleaned it," Nora said. "I spent almost an hour on it." "The complaint says otherwise." "Who complained?" Mrs. Patterson didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew. The next day, another complaint, this time about the guest bedroom. Sheets not tucked properly, dust on the windowsill. Nora had cleaned that room the same way she had cleaned it every single day for 4 months. Nothing had changed in her work. But suddenly, everything she did was wrong. By the third day, Nora realized this wasn't bad luck. Someone was setting her up. The supplies had been switched. The complaints were being filed before she even finished her shift. Someone was building a trail of problems that pointed directly at her. On Thursday, Nora overheard Mrs. Patterson on the phone in the kitchen. She wasn't trying to listen. She was wiping down the hallway counter and the kitchen door was half open, but the voice on the other end was loud enough to hear. It was Clarissa. "I want documentation on everything, every missed task, every complaint. I want it in writing. I want a file." Mrs. Patterson's voice was low, careful. "Ma'am, she's been a good worker for 4 months. There was never a problem before. There's a problem now, and I want her gone by Friday. If you can't handle that, I'll find someone who can." The line went dead. Mrs. Patterson sat at the table for a long time, staring at her phone, saying nothing. Nora stood in the hallway, frozen, the cloth in her hand dripping onto the floor. She understood now. This wasn't about the scratch. This wasn't about Ben. This was about what happened that night. The moment she spoke up. The moment Julian sided with her instead of Clarissa. And Clarissa was going to make her pay for it. But what Nora didn't know yet was that Clarissa's reasons for wanting her gone went far deeper than pride. And she was about to find out exactly how deep. It happened the next evening. Friday, the day Clarissa wanted Nora gone. Nora was on the second floor, finishing the last bathroom of her shift. Ben was downstairs in his room, probably asleep by now. She was tired. Her arms ached. The week had drained her in a way that wasn't just physical. Every day had felt like walking on a floor that could crack open under her at any moment. She gathered the used towels, stepped into the hallway, and headed toward the laundry chute near the east wing. That part of the house was mostly empty in the evenings. Julian's study was there, but he rarely used it after 7. The guest rooms on that side hadn't been occupied in weeks. But as Nora passed the second guest room, she heard a voice, Clarissa's voice, coming through the door that was open just a few inches. Nora stopped. She didn't mean to listen. She was going to keep walking. But then she heard her own name. "The maid is a problem," Clarissa said. "She's been getting too close to Julian. He set up a room for her kid. He told her to report directly to him. That's not how this was supposed to go." A man's voice responded through the phone speaker. Calm, professional. "Then remove her. You have the file." "I'm working on it. But Julian overruled me last time, in front of the staff. If I push too hard, he'll get suspicious. Clarissa, we don't have time for this. The board meeting is in 12 days. If we don't have the filings ready, the acquisition window closes. You know what happens then." "I know, Victor. I know." Nora pressed her back against the wall. Her hands were shaking. She didn't understand everything she was hearing, but she understood enough. "The medical assessment is the key," Victor said. "His wheelchair, his condition, that's our leverage. If we can present him as physically and mentally unable to lead the company, the board will approve the transfer. The paperwork is already drafted. All we need is the final medical review and your signature as his fiancée authorizing the evaluation. And you're sure this holds up legally? It holds up long enough. By the time his lawyers figure out what happened, we'll have controlling interest. Mercer Technologies becomes ours. He gets a payout. We get the company. Clarissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And after? After you walk away with your share, 15 million, clean? And the maid? She's a loose end. If she's heard anything, seen anything, talked to Julian about anything unusual, she needs to be out of the house before the board meeting. Not after. Before. I'll handle it." The call ended. Nora didn't move. She stood in that hallway for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably 30 seconds. The towels were still in her arms. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. The engagement was fake. Clarissa wasn't Julian's fiancée because she loved him. She was there to take his company. And Julian, sitting in his wheelchair on the second floor, had no idea. Or so Nora thought. Nora didn't sleep that night. She lay on the narrow bed in the staff quarters with Ben curled up beside her, his small body warm against her side, and she stared at the ceiling. Every word she had heard played back in her head on a loop. Hostile acquisition, medical assessment, fiancé authorizing the evaluation, loose end. She had two choices: keep quiet, finish the week, and hope Clarissa's Friday deadline passed without consequences, or tell Julian. The first choice was safer. The second choice was right. The next morning, Nora waited until Clarissa left the house for a hair appointment downtown. Then she went to the second floor. Julian's office door was closed. She knocked once. "Come in." Julian was behind his desk in his wheelchair, reading something on his laptop. He looked up when Nora walked in and immediately noticed something was wrong. Her face was tight. Her hands were clasped in front of her the way people hold themselves when they're about to say something they can't take back. "Sit down," Julian said. Nora sat across from him, and then she told him everything, word for word. The phone call, Victor Ashford, the hostile acquisition, the medical assessment, the board meeting in 12 days, Clarissa's $15 million payout, and the part about Nora being a loose end that needed to be removed before any of it happened. When she finished, the room was silent. Julian hadn't moved. His hands were resting on the armrests of his wheelchair. His face was completely still. Then he did something that made Nora's blood go cold. He smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a relieved smile. The kind of smile a person makes when something they've been waiting for has finally arrived. "I know," Julian said. Nora stared at him. "You know? I've known about Clarissa for almost 3 weeks. I've known about Victor Ashford for 2. I've suspected the acquisition play for longer than that." Nora didn't understand. "Then why is she still here? Why haven't you—" "Because I don't have proof yet. Not the kind that holds up. I have suspicion. I have patterns. But I need documents. I need recordings. I need something physical that connects Clarissa and Ashford to a specific plan." Nora shook her head slowly. "But your wheelchair, if they're using your condition to—" Julian looked at her. A long, steady look. Then he placed both hands flat on the desk, pushed his chair back, and stood up. Not struggled, not wobbled. Stood up. Smoothly. Like someone who had been standing every single day when no one was watching. Nora stopped breathing. Julian stepped around the desk and stood in front of her. Full height. Steady. Strong. "I'm not paralyzed," he said. "I never was. The wheelchair is an act. I've been using it for the past 6 weeks to watch who around me is loyal and who is planning to destroy me." Nora couldn't speak. "I need 5 more days," Julian said. 5 days to get the documents I need. And I need someone inside this house that I can trust. Someone Clarissa doesn't suspect. He looked at her directly. "Will you help me?" Nora said yes. She didn't think about it for a long time. She didn't weigh the risks. She didn't ask what would happen if they got caught. She just said yes. Because in that moment, standing in front of a man who had just stood up from a wheelchair he never needed, Nora understood something clearly. Julian Mercer had trusted her with the biggest secret in that house, and she wasn't going to let that trust be wasted. The 5 days that followed changed everything about how Nora moved through the mansion. On the outside, nothing looked different. She still cleaned the bathrooms. She still wiped down the kitchen. She still came in through the service entrance and left the same way. But now, she was watching, listening, paying attention to things she had ignored for 4 months. Julian gave her simple instructions. Don't do anything unusual. Don't change your routine. Just tell me what you see. Who comes in? Who Clarissa talks to on the phone? What rooms she uses when she thinks no one is watching? And never write anything down. Tell me in person, in my office, with the door closed. Day 1. Nora noticed that Clarissa made 3 phone calls before lunch, each one taken in the guest room at the end of the East Wing, the same room where Nora had overheard the original call. Every time Clarissa locked the door behind her. Day 2. A courier arrived with a thick envelope addressed to Clarissa. No return address. Clarissa signed for it personally and took it straight to the guest room. She didn't come out for 40 minutes. Day 3. Julian told Nora that his lawyer had begun filing counter motions with the board. Quietly. Nothing that would set off alarms. Just enough to slow down any vote that might come before the 12-day deadline. Day 4. Mrs. Patterson pulled Nora aside in the kitchen. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Something is going on in this house," Mrs. Patterson said. "I don't know what it is, but I've worked here for 7 years and I've never felt this before." Nora kept her face still. "I don't know what you mean." Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly and walked away. Meanwhile, Ben had become the one person in the house that everyone liked. The kitchen staff saved him crackers. The gardener let him sit in the wheelbarrow. He wandered through the hallways with his rubber band in one hand and a cracker in the other, completely unaware of anything happening around him. To him, this was just a big house with nice people and interesting doors. On the evening of day 4, Nora heard Clarissa on the phone again. This time the call was short. One sentence told Nora everything she needed to know. "Wednesday at 2, bring the documents. We'll do it here." Nora went straight to Julian's office. "She's bringing Victor Ashford to the house," Nora said. "Wednesday, 2 o'clock, with documents." Julian leaned back in his wheelchair. His eyes were calm, almost too calm. "Good," he said. "Then Wednesday is when we finish this." Wednesday came. The house felt different from the moment Nora woke up. The air was heavier, quieter, like the entire mansion was holding its breath. Clarissa was up early. She was dressed sharply. Black blazer, heels, hair pulled back tight. She moved through the house like someone preparing for a performance. She told Mrs. Patterson that a business associate would be arriving at 2 o'clock and that the dining room on the first floor needed to be set up for a private meeting. No interruptions, no staff in that wing. Mrs. Patterson nodded and passed the instruction to the rest of the team. Nora received the message like everyone else. Stay away from the East Wing after 2. Julian stayed in his wheelchair on the second floor. His door was closed. To everyone else, it looked like an ordinary day. To Nora, it felt like the last few hours before something exploded. At 1:55, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out. Mid-50s, gray suit, leather briefcase. He walked to the front door with the posture of someone who had been in expensive rooms his entire life. Victor Ashford. Clarissa met him at the entrance. They didn't hug. They didn't smile. They shook hands like two people who had a transaction to complete. Then they walked together into the first-floor dining room and closed the door. Nora was on the second floor. Ben was in his room near the kitchen. She had told the kitchen staff to keep an eye on him. But Ben was 2 years old, and 2-year-olds don't follow plans. At 2:20, Nora came downstairs for clean rags. She passed the kitchen and glanced toward Ben's room. The door was open. The room was empty. Her stomach dropped. She moved quickly through the hallway, checking corners, checking the living room. Nothing. She turned toward the east wing, the wing she had been told to stay away from, and saw it. The dining room door was open about 6 inches, and standing right inside, holding his rubber band in one hand and staring up at 2 adults he had never seen together before, was Ben. Nora's heart stopped. She rushed to the doorway. Inside, Clarissa and Victor were standing over the table. Papers were spread across the surface, folders, printed documents, a laptop open to what looked like a legal filing. Victor was mid-sentence when he noticed the child. Clarissa saw Ben and her face changed instantly. She grabbed the nearest folder and shoved it into her briefcase. Who let this child in here? Nora stepped in, scooped Ben off the floor, and held him against her chest. I'm sorry. He got out of his room. I'll take him back right now. She turned to leave, and in that half-second turn, her eyes caught the label on the folder still sitting on the table. Black text on a white tab, clear enough to read from 4 feet away. Mercer Technologies, transfer of control. Nora walked out without looking back. She carried Ben down the hallway, up the stairs, and straight to Julian's office. She knocked once. He opened the door. The folder is labeled Transfer of Control, Nora said. Mercer Technologies. It's on the dining room table right now. Victor Ashford is here. They're reviewing it together. Julian looked at her. Then he looked at Ben, who was chewing on his rubber band, completely unaware that he had just walked into the most important room in the house at the most important moment. Thank you, Julian said quietly. It's time. Julian didn't go downstairs right away. He sat in his office for exactly 7 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first to his lawyer, the second to his head of security. Both calls lasted less than a minute each. Then he rolled his wheelchair to the elevator and went down to the 1st floor. When Julian appeared in the dining room doorway, Clarissa and Victor were still at the table. Papers spread out, the laptop open. Victor had a pen in his hand. Clarissa was leaning over a document, pointing at something near the bottom of a page. They both looked up when the wheelchair rolled in. Julian, Clarissa said. Her voice was smooth, controlled. The same voice she used when she wanted everyone to believe she had nothing to hide. I told Mrs. Patterson this was a private meeting. I know what you told her, Julian said. He wheeled himself to the head of the table. His face was calm. His voice was even. I just wanted to meet your guest. Clarissa hesitated for half a second. Then she recovered. This is Victor Ashford. He's a consultant. He's advising me on some personal investments. Julian looked at Victor. Personal investments. Victor stood and extended his hand. Mr. Mercer, it's a pleasure. Julian didn't take it. He kept his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair. What kind of consulting do you do, Mr. Ashford? Corporate restructuring, asset management, standard advisory work. And what are you advising my fiancé on today? Victor glanced at Clarissa. A quick look. The kind of look 2 people share when a plan is going sideways and they haven't decided who speaks next. It's nothing that concerns the company, Clarissa said quickly. This is personal, Julian. I told you. Julian nodded slowly. Then he reached across the table and picked up the folder. The one Nora had seen, the one with the white label. He read the label out loud. Mercer Technologies, Transfer of Control. The room went silent. Clarissa's face didn't move, but her eyes did. Something behind them shifted. The way a locked door sounds different when someone on the other side starts testing the handle. I also have the recording of your phone call from last Friday, Julian said. The one where you discussed using my medical condition to declare me unfit? The one where Mr. Ashford promised you $15 million? The one where you called my maid a loose end? Victor reached for his briefcase. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Sit down, Julian said. Victor didn't sit. Julian placed both hands flat on the table. Then he pushed himself up, slowly, steadily. The wheelchair rolled backward behind him. He rose to his full height and stood there, looking down at both of them. Clarissa's mouth opened. No words came out. "I'm not paralyzed," Julian said. "I never was." He took 2 steps toward Victor. "Your briefcase stays. My security team is outside that door. My lawyer will be here in 20 minutes. And you are not leaving this house until every document on this table has been cataloged." The dining room door opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside. Julian turned to Clarissa. She was standing frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her face completely drained of color. "Get out of my house," Julian said, "and don't come back." Clarissa was gone within the hour. She took 2 suitcases, her phone, and her car. The rest she left behind. Victor Ashford didn't leave as easily. Julian's lawyer arrived in 18 minutes. The documents were photographed, cataloged, and sealed. Victor's briefcase was opened in front of witnesses. Inside were 3 copies of a board resolution authorizing the transfer of controlling interest in Mercer Technologies to a shell company in Delaware. Clarissa's signature was on 2 of them. Julian's line was blank. They had been planning to forge it. Julian's legal team filed an emergency injunction that evening. By Thursday morning, the acquisition attempt was dead. Victor's brokerage license was under review. Clarissa's name was flagged in a fraud investigation that would follow her for years. The house was quiet that night, a different kind of quiet, not the tense silence that had lived in those walls for months. This was the quiet that comes after a storm passes and you realize everything is still standing. Nora put Ben to bed in the small room near the kitchen. He fell asleep in 3 minutes, the rubber band still wrapped around his fingers. She stood watching him breathe, this boy who had wandered into a room full of secrets and walked out holding the same rubber band he walked in with. He had no idea what he had done. He was 2. He was just looking for something interesting. The next morning, Julian called Nora into his office. He was standing, no wheelchair. The chair was folded in the corner like something that had served its purpose. "Your pay is being adjusted," he said. "Effective immediately. Your position is permanent. Full benefits. Ben's childcare is covered." Nora opened her mouth, but Julian raised his hand. "You didn't have to help me. You could have stayed quiet. You could have walked away, but you didn't." Nora nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Later that afternoon, Julian was in the living room reading on his tablet when Ben wandered in from the hallway. He walked straight up to Julian, looked at him with those big brown eyes, and held out his hand. In it was the rubber band. Chewed, stretched, bent out of shape. Julian looked at it. Then he reached down and took it from Ben's hand. Carefully, like it was something worth keeping. Ben smiled, then turned around and wandered back down the hallway. Nora was standing near the doorway. She had seen the whole thing. Julian looked up, and their eyes met. Neither of them said a word. But something passed between them. Something that didn't need language. Something that had started with a scratch on a woman's cheek and had quietly, without either of them planning it, become the beginning of something real. If this story reminded you that the people who change your life are often the ones nobody notices, hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and tell me in the comments who in your life deserves to be seen.